Some hearts aren't just designed to beat, they're destined to roar. That's you. And that's what's echoing in hushed tones behind closed doors, in encrypted chats, in rooms you've never even entered. They're talking about your incredible heart, and not the soft, easily forgiving kind that just posts platitudes. No. We're talking about a heart that flexes without fracturing, bleeds yet still believes, that steps into the fires of betrayal as if it's just another Tuesday, emerging with sharpened intuition and a luminescence that makes deceitful souls visibly uneasy. Let's confront a harsh reality quickly. According to deep trauma research, most individuals never fully recover from the sting of repeated emotional betrayal. They often shut down, become numb, or ironically, transform into the very thing that wounded them. But you remain tender in a world relentlessly trying to calcify you. You didn't merely navigate the chaos, you continued to love right in its epicenter. And honestly, that's astonishing. Who truly manages that? If your heart possessed a resume, it would be wildly overqualified and severely undercompensated. So now, their whispers are turning into audible declarations, perhaps in admiration, maybe in confusion, or quite possibly in sheer disbelief. How do they just keep going? They've got an incredible heart. Yet, they genuinely don't grasp the true depth of that statement. Tonight, we're going to dismantle that idea like never before. No sweet talk, no tired cliches, just the raw, unvarnished truth about what it genuinely means to possess a heart like yours in a world intent on its crushing. Brace yourself. You're about to hear your own story unveiled in a way you might not have anticipated. Let's delve in. 1. The relentless march of a wounded warrior. They say you've got mad heart, but their understanding barely scratches the surface. What they're truly observing is someone who kept moving forward when most would have collapsed. You were showing up for life, bleeding internally, held together by sheer willpower and a profound silence. You weren't afforded the luxury of pausing to fall apart. Life didn't wait. Responsibilities never halted. While others called in sick for minor inconveniences, you were dragging your very soul through battles no one else even knew existed. They witness your fortitude now, but they can't fathom the immense cost. You maintained a smile while carrying trauma that could have necessitated hospitalization for others. You persevered when your mind screamed surrender, when the sheer weight of everything felt insurmountable, when even simple acts like brushing your teeth or replying to a text felt like scaling a mountain. And they labeled that strength, oblivious that sometimes it was just pure survival instinct, not even bravery, just absolute necessity. You didn't just endure hardship, you endured it in solitude. No one to help you process, no soft landing, no applause, no real support system. You navigated life with broken pieces of your spirit, yet somehow managed to be kind, to show up for others, to hold conversations as if everything was perfectly fine. You didn't wait for complete healing to proceed, because healing never arrived neatly packaged. You healed amidst chaos, amidst heartbreak, amidst crisis. And now they call it mad heart, as if it were a casual choice, as if you woke up one day and thought, yes, I'll shoulder the weight of everyone's expectations while barely clinging to my own life. No, what you possess is a heart trained by profound pain, refined by abandonment, rigorously tested by betrayal. The astonishing fact that you remain tender, still hopeful, still open to the possibility of love, that's not merely heart, that's a miracle wearing skin. They will never truly comprehend the sheer endurance it takes to keep walking with invisible wounds. But that, precisely, is what distinguishes you from the ordinary. They break and expect others to gather the fragments. You broke and quietly, without an instruction manual, without applause, and with no exit plan. Learn to rebuild yourself. That's why they whisper now, because they're finally grasping at your heart isn't just strong, it's indestructible. 2. The dangerous grace of retained composure. They anticipated your breaking point, a snap, a lash out, a final explosion, so they could triumphantly declare, "See, told you they were the problem." But you didn't. You did something far more potent, far more disconcerting. You remained serene. You chose grace over explosive rage, and that decision destabilized them more profoundly than any angry outburst ever could. Because when someone wrongs you and your response is silence, peace, or kindness, it forces them into solitary confinement with their own guilt. No one to blame, no chaos to obscure their actions, just them and the heavy burden of what they did. Most react to pain by immediately inflicting it back. You didn't. Not because you were impervious to betrayal, but because you absolutely refused to let it warp your essence. That's what truly unsettled them. They banked on your reaction to legitimize their actions. They needed you to descend to their level, so their conscience could find solace. But you resisted the bait. You stayed in your own lane, quietly elevated yourself, and allowed their own actions to reverberate louder than any argument you could have ever presented. It's not that you lacked evidence. You possessed the truth. You had every justifiable reason to expose them, to drag their name through the mud. But you understood the profound tranquility that accompanies restraint, the specific brand of justice that requires no audience. So you simply walked away without slamming the door. You healed without any public announcements. And they remained bewildered by how someone could be hurt so deeply and yet still elect to maintain their dignity. That's the part that stings them most. You didn't become cold. You didn't start treating everyone like the person who hurt you. You didn't construct impenetrable walls. You established healthy boundaries. You didn't become embittered. You became discerning. And in a world where pain is frequently used as an excuse for toxicity, you remained accountable for your own energetic output. Now, they discuss your heart as if it's an enigma, but the truth is, you were simply built differently. You don't engage in revenge. You allow consequences to perform their duty. You don't need to validate your side. Your internal peace is validation enough. And that level of self-control, that's not weakness. That's spiritual warfare disguised as maturity. And they're only just beginning to realize you've mastered it. 3. The astonishing persistence of softness after betrayal. You didn't just endure betrayal, heartbreak, and disappointment. You traversed them and somehow, miraculously, remained soft. And that's the aspect no one can truly comprehend. You had every conceivable reason to shut down, to seal off your heart, to let bitterness consume you. The way people treated you could have effortlessly transformed you into someone cold, angry, fiercely guarded. But it didn't. And that's why they stand in awe. Because the way you still show up with kindness, still lead with love, still maintain hope after absolutely everything, it's nothing short of extraordinary. Most people don't rebound like that. They allow betrayal to harden them. They lose faith in everyone. They become guarded, defensive, emotionally distant. But you felt every crack, every piercing stab, every silent betrayal, and you still refused to let it shatter your spirit. That kind of softness after profound pain isn't a vulnerability. It's a profound strength. Because remaining tender in a world that consistently tests your limits isn't easy. It means deliberately choosing vulnerability after being wounded. It means offering love again, even when every rational fiber of your being screams not to, and power. People talk about strength as if it's solely about being tough and unyielding. But what you possess is a rare species of strength, the kind that resolutely refuses to let darkness fundamentally alter you. You remained open. You kept your heart whole when life tirelessly tried to fragment it. That's the true flex. Anyone can become numb. Anyone can push people away. But retaining your humanity after being deeply hurt, that demands profound soul work. You still smile, still laugh, still show up for others, even after being let down repeatedly. That's why people struggle to define you, because what you embody isn't typical. It's not performative. It's not for show. It's resilience forged through deep, unseen inner battles. And it manifests in how you still treat people with genuine care, even when they've revealed their absolute worst to you. They claim you've got mad heart, but they're only seeing the outcome. What they're truly witnessing is someone who had every justifiable reason to become cold and consciously chose to remain warm. And in today's world, that is nothing short of revolutionary for the audacity of conviction. Risking madness for truth, you risked appearing irrational for daring to live with such unwavering conviction. You embarked on paths that made onlookers stare. You uttered truths that made others squirm. You trusted instincts that defied all logical explanation, and for a considerable period, it seemed as though you were off course. Or worse, completely unhinged. You weren't following the conventional route. You weren't chasing external approval, validation, or applause. You were attuned to something far deeper, something that resonated louder than mere logic, your own profound conviction. And that made people uncomfortable. To them, it looked like madness. Who walks away from a stable job without a safety net? Who severs ties with individuals everyone else tolerates? Who initiates projects with no initial funding, leaves seemingly fine relationships, or dares to expose hidden darkness that no one else even mentions? You did. Because you weren't pursuing what made sense to them, you were following what resonated with your soul. And even when you had no tangible proof, even when the timing was utterly unclear, your spirit intrinsically knew what was coming. They rolled their eyes. They whispered behind your back. Some openly mocked you. You were hit with the label so too deep, too intense, delusional. But you steadfastly stayed the course. Not because it felt effortless, but because something within you simply wouldn't permit you to quit. That internal GPS kept buzzing, even when no one else could perceive its signal. You weren't reckless. You were resolute. And that kind of conviction is exceedingly rare, especially in a world addicted to instant proof, social media likes, and external validation. Now, the seismic shift is occurring. The very things you articulated years ago are manifesting in real time. The connections you made, which once seemed random to others, are beginning to click into place. And the very individuals who once doubted you are now circling back in utter disbelief. They're not just shocked. They're quietly studying you, because what they dismissed as delusion has ultimately revealed itself to be divine alignment. You never required their approval to walk in your sacred purpose. But now, they're realizing your heart wasn't built on blind hope. It was calibrated to a higher frequency, one they couldn't possibly hear because they were too preoccupied with trying to sound normal. You risked looking crazy, and now you are becoming the living evidence that truth never needed an audience, only obedience. 5. The silent power of misunderstanding and power. Time as your ally, you didn't squander your breath trying to justify yourself. You didn't plead to be understood or frantically chase after anyone attempting to correct the falsehoods. You witnessed the games, the insidious twisting of your character, the deliberate attempts to cast you as the villain in a narrative you never even authored. And you let them, not because you were indifferent, but because you knew a truth they didn't. Truth doesn't expire, it simply matures. And when it finally arrives, it does so with undeniable, piercing clarity. They expected you to panic, to jump on the defensive, to beg people to see the real you. But you remained silent. You didn't chase your reputation. You allowed them to construct their case with flimsy evidence and shaky narratives. And while they were busy telling everyone who you weren't, You were diligently becoming everything they claimed you'd never be. You knew the truth would outlast the gossip. You knew the lies would eventually rot and crumble. And now they are. That kind of profound composure doesn't stem from ego. It arises from a deep, trusting relationship with time. You trusted time to expose what you didn't have to scream. You weren't striving to win the crowd. You were allowing the crowd to observe the unfolding show. And now, they're witnessing the plot twist they never saw, coming the truth, unraveling everything they swore was fact. Allowing people to misunderstand you takes an immense, mad heart. Most individuals fight tooth and nail to be seen correctly. You allowed yourself to be misjudged, knowing it wasn't your responsibility to correct every single narrative. That patience, that profound spiritual discipline, it's unnerving to people who thrive on chaos. You maintained your peace for so long they began to believe you had none left. And now, they're realizing you were simply too potent to waste it on their noise. Their fabricated stories are cracking under pressure. The very lies they used to smear your name are starting to make them look questionable. You never had to prove anything, because you knew that when truth finally arrives, it speaks with a voice louder than any rumor, and it does not stutter. 6. The confusing loyalty of unconditional love. You poured your absolute best into people who consistently offered you the bare minimum. You checked in when they vanished, showed up when they disappeared, extended grace to those who wouldn't have lifted a finger for you. And now, people look at your unwavering loyalty as if it's a flaw, as if it makes no logical sense. They say you've got mad heart, but what they truly mean is that you utterly perplex them. Because in their transactional world, love is conditional, performance-based. But in your world, love is an inherent value, not a reward to be earned. You didn't love people because they earned it. You loved them because that's simply who you are. You allowed people to sit at your table, even when they brought nothing to it, not because you were desperate, but because you intrinsically understood what it felt like to be empty. You knew how to pour without keeping a meticulous tally. And that kind of profound generosity, it exposes others, because it reminds them of the parts of themselves they buried, the softness they lost, the empathy they traded for pride. You weren't being naive, you acutely perceived the imbalance. You saw how little they reciprocated, and power. But you weren't loving them for what they did, you were loving them in spite of it. That's a fundamentally different kind of power. Most people cut off anyone who doesn't immediately mirror their energy. But you remained anchored in your own values, even when it meant loving without any applause or acknowledgement. They used to perceive you as weak. Now they're realizing you were exceptionally rare. Because in a world that is inherently emotionally transactional, you loved without conditions, and that evoked two powerful responses in peopling. They felt safe, and they felt guilty. Safe because your love wasn't a performance. Guilty because deep down, they knew they didn't deserve it. And still, you gave it. They didn't earn a seat at your table, but you pulled up a chair for them anyway, not because of who they were, but because of who you are. And now, they're left wondering how someone with such an expansive heart still exists in a world like this. The truth is, you weren't doing it for them. You were honoring you, your values, your integrity, your divine assignment. And that's what they'll never be able to replicate. 7. The conscious choice of unconditional presence amidst conditions. You observed the early signs. You sensed how their energy subtly shifted depending on the day, the audience, or your momentary usefulness. Their love came with unspoken terms and conditions, implicit rules you were expected to adhere to retain their affection. Be less of this. Tone that down. Don't shine too brightly. Don't speak too boldly. And if you ever slipped up, if you revealed too much of your authentic truth, you would feel their emotional temperature drop instantly. You knew it wasn't genuine love. It was a performance-based loyalty. But you showed up anyway. Not because you were blind, not because you were desperate, but because you held onto a hope that your unwavering consistency might awaken something dormant within them. You weren't naive, you were deeply intentional. You wanted to demonstrate what it truly looked like to love without strings attached. You wanted to model something fundamentally different. You thought, perhaps, just perhaps, if they experienced unconditional presence, it might inspire them to evolve. But the harsh truth is, not everyone grows when you extend grace. Some simply become comfortable. Some perceive your consistency as an endless resource to be drained. They assume you'll always be there, regardless of how they treat you, and they act accordingly. What they didn't anticipate was that your love possessed a line, a silent boundary. You weren't going to play the martyr indefinitely. You were never trying to be a savior. You were offering them a chance, not a lifelong contract. They misinterpreted your grace for gullibility, but you were always acutely aware of their maneuvers. You simply wanted to be better than what you had experienced. You didn't want to withhold, withdraw, or weaponize affection as it had been done to you. That's why your love carried so much inherent weight, because it was pure, even in the face of their inherent conditionality. But that kind of love is exceedingly rare. And rare things, once lost, do not casually return. They failed to value it while it flowed freely, but now that it's gone, they feel the stark draught. You didn't depart to punish them. You simply ceased standing in a place that was never designed to hold the fullness of who you are. And now they know love like yours doesn't expire. It simply evolves. And once it outgrows its container, it never truly returns. 8. Unwavering dignity amidst public scrutiny. They dragged your name through the mud, ridiculed you, spread insidious half-truths like wildfire, and watched the crowd eagerly devour it. You became the punchline in the very rooms where you once radiated light. They took their calculated shots publicly, hoping you would break privately. Most people crumble under that kind of intense pressure. They panic, they retaliate. They lose themselves in a frantic attempt to defend what others had already firmly decided about them. But not you. You stood there, your name being slandered. Yet your dignity remained impeccably intact. You didn't scramble to correct every fabricated version of the lie. You didn't dilute your essence to become more palatable. You allowed the chaos to play out, not because you were unfeeling, but because you knew your reputation would clear itself without you having to scream. That kind of profound restraint is rare. That kind of inner stillness, that's not merely emotional strength. That's spiritual discipline. That's someone who has been meticulously built from the inside out. You confronted what most people fear above all else, public misunderstanding. Being unjustly cast as the villain in a story you never wrote. And while the world watched, waiting for you to unravel, you simply kept moving. You kept growing. You kept honoring your own path. That's what confused them most. You didn't try to prove anything. You didn't clap back. You didn't meet their noise with more noise. You allowed your evolution to speak louder than their drama ever could. They assumed the humiliation would utterly undo you, but it didn't. It refined you. You became more intentional, more focused, more potent, because now you knew precisely who was who. The fire didn't consume you. It merely revealed the solid bricks you were made of. And when the truth finally surfaced, when people began to awaken and comprehend what truly transpired, you didn't gloat. You didn't utter, "I told you so." You simply continued walking, radiating the kind of grace that requires no applause. Because your healing wasn't for public consumption. Your peace wasn't a performance. This wasn't merely about reputation. It was about remaining anchored to who you are when the crowd desperately tried to make you forget. You didn't just survive the humiliation, you mastered the art of staying aligned when everything around you screamed for you to fold. That's not mere heart. That's divine engineering. 9. The unseen protection of the plotting hand. You knew precisely what they were doing, the subtle shade, the saccharine fake smiles, the hushed conversations that abruptly ceased upon your entry into the room. You perceived every bit of it. You saw their moves before they even made them. You detected the hidden agendas, the backhanded compliments, the loyalty that miraculously existed only when eyes were watching. But you never called them out. You never exposed their treachery. You didn't blast screenshots or orchestrate elaborate revenge plots. You protected them, not because you were ignorant, but because you were profoundly discerning. They assumed you were naive, that you hadn't caught on, that you were simply too trusting, too forgiving, too blind. But that was never the case. You simply refused to grant their darkness the reaction it craved. You weren't raised to mimic betrayal. You were nurtured with values, with an innate spiritual strength. You knew precisely who you were, and more importantly, who you steadfastly refused to become. So yes, you allowed them to remain close. You allowed them to feel safe, even as they clandestinely sharpened their knives. Not because you were weak, but because you were robust enough to allow karma to handle what you could have effortlessly annihilated. You held the door open, even though you knew they yearned to witness your downfall. That's not foolishness, that's controlled grace. That's the kind of formidable strength people cannot measure. And the truth is, you never protected them for their benefit. You did it for your own. You weren't going to let their egregious behavior rewrite your inherent character. You weren't going to let their mess stain your untarnished name. That's why you remained silent. That's why you chose the high road, even when it was incredibly lonely. Because you know who you are when no one is applauding. And that is something most people will never, ever understand. Now, they're confused, disarmed, still puzzling over how someone with your acute level of discernment could walk with so much unwavering love. But that's the pointing you always knew. You simply chose elevation over ego, and that's why they're quietly terrified of you now. Because the person who perceives everything and yet still safeguards peace, that's not someone to trifle with. That's someone chosen. 10. The unyielding spiriting. Villainy refused. You navigated through a hell that would have utterly shattered most people. The kind of profound pain that crushes spirits, twists minds, and transforms even the purest love into bitter resentment. Those around you expected the absolute worst. They anticipated that after everything you endured, you'd become hardened, ruthless, perhaps even cruel. They waited for you to flip the script, to assume the role of the villain in your own narrative, to repay pain with pain. But you didn't. You embraced the more arduous path, the one fewer souls possess the courage to tread. You resolutely refused to let your suffering define you. That refusal is precisely what utterly shocks them. They believed the fire would render you cold, make you calculating, compel you to wield your pain as a formidable weapon. Instead, you became a beacon of light in the darkness. You became living proof that survival isn't about transforming into a monster or succumbing to victimhood. It's about soaring above, remaining intrinsically true to who you fundamentally are beneath the wounds and scars. They claim you've got mad heart because they've watched you burn, and yet you still emanated light. While they expected you to lash out, you appeared with profound compassion. While they assumed you'd seal yourself off, you remained open. While they braced for your downfall, you relentlessly kept building. That kind of heart is profoundly difficult to comprehend because it's so rare. It's forged in the deepest infernos of pain, yet polished with inherent, inner grace that defies all chaos. You became living proof that pain doesn't have to make you bitter. It can make you wise. It can make you incredibly resilient. It can transform you into someone who carries wounds but harbors no grudges. And that's why they cannot cease talking about your heart, not because it's flawless, but because it's real. Because it remained soft when it could have hardened. Because it stayed kind when it could have turned cold. They never anticipated that from you, and power. And that's why you're not merely surviving, you're rewriting the narrative. You're demonstrating to the world what it truly means to be strong, not by breaking others, but by breaking through yourself. 11. The revolutionary act of choosing healing over ego. You didn't choose the convenient path when every fiber of your being screamed for justice, for revenge, or at the very least, for a moment to wallow in self-pity. You chose something significantly more arduous: healing. You didn't desire to remain trapped in the suffocating confines of victimhood or drown in the abyss of self-pity, as so many do after being deeply wounded. Instead, and power, you gazed at your own reflection, confronted the darkness within yourself, and declared, "I am not going to let this define me." That declaration initiated a war, not against others, but against your own ingrained patterns, fears, and doubts, and power. You sat with pain that could have swallowed you whole, but you steadfastly refused to cast it onto anyone else. You didn't allow your suffering to become an excuse to lash out or to blame. You owned your scars without ever using them as defensive shields or offensive weapons. And that's a level of emotional responsibility most people aren't even aware exists. They fear that kind of strength because confronting your own shadows without pointing accusatory fingers at the world shakes the very foundation of how broken people justify their pain. When someone utterly refuses to be a victim, refuses to blame, they become utterly unpredictable, a force that cannot be controlled or neatly categorized. You became that force. You lost things that felt profoundly familiar: relationships, illusions, safe spaces, because you refused to perpetuate broken cycles any longer. But losing all of that was essential. It was the price for genuine freedom. The ego desperately wanted you to cling to the familiar, even if it continued to hurt you. But your heart chose growth over comfort, healing over pride, truth over illusion. Now, you stand in a place few ever reaching, fully owning your story, without masks, without excuses. That's why people say you have mad heart, not because you avoided pain, but because you confronted it head-on and utterly refused to let it turn you bitter or broken. That kind of courage is rare. That kind of healing is revolutionary, and that's what makes you unstoppable. 12. The embodiment of sanctuary, becoming the safe space you never had. You carried wounds no one ever bothered to inquire about. You felt pain that wasn't intrinsically yours to bear, passed down like unwanted heirlooms. While many around you reacted to their trauma by inflicting harm upon others or constructing impenetrable walls to shut the world out, you did something profoundly different. You took that very same pain, confronted it, and transformed it. You didn't allow it to poison you or those in your vicinity. Instead, you transmuted it into something incredibly rare: a refuge, a sanctuary, a safe space that simply didn't exist for you when you desperately needed it most. You became the very person you once tirelessly searched for but never found, the one who would listen without judgment, who would hold space without pressure, who would heal without conditions. That kind of heart is rare because it demands facing your own brokenness without allowing it to define your relational boundaries. You didn't transfer your trauma onto others, you alchemized it into love, boundless patience, and profound understanding. Now, people are drawn to you like moths to a flame. Power. Some openly admire you, craving the deep peace and safety your energy inherently provides. They discover solace in your presence because you make them feel seen and accepted in ways they've never before experienced. But not everyone handles that well. Some secretly resent the fact that they need you. They despise feeling vulnerable in your presence because it forces them to confront parts of themselves they'd rather keep hidden. They fear how your strength subtly exposes their own perceived weaknesses. But you don't shrink. You don't dim your light to make others comfortable. Your energy is a shelter, yes, but it's also a challenge, a mirror reflecting what has been ignored, denied, or buried within them. You hold space not just to comfort others, but to bravely encourage growth and truth. That's the kind of heart that fundamentally changes lives, not by force, but by a steady, unshakable presence. You became the safe space you never had, and that's why people either worship your energy or struggle quietly with needing it, because you're living proof that healing isn't just personal, it's revolutionary. 13. the art of silent warfaring, making silence a sword and kindness a kingdom. You never felt the compulsive need to shout, to make your point vehemently heard. You didn't have to raise your voice to command attention, because your silence spoke volumes in its own fiercely eloquent way. When you withdrew, it wasn't a retreat, it was a powerful statement. Your absence became a deafening reminder of what they had taken for granted, a silent truth that echoed louder than any argument could ever have. They attempted to break you, to bait you into chaos, but instead you chose profound calm. And that calm unsettled them more than any noise you could have generated. You never sought revenge, even when it would have been effortless and deeply gratifying. Instead, you focused intently on yourself, on healing, on growing, on shining even brighter. Your current luminescence now serves as a quiet rebuke to those who hurt you. It triggers a subtle, sometimes uncomfortable recognition within them, a silent repentance they don't always openly admit. They see what they irrevocably lost, what they carelessly damaged, and power, and how you rose above it all without ever descending to their level. In the midst of all the chaos, you meticulously built peace, not the superficial kind that merely masks problems, but the profound kind that stands unwavering, even when storms rage violently around it. You forget a kingdom where kindness is the absolute law, not a weakness. Your gentleness became a formidable fortress, not something to be exploited, but something to profoundly respect and, yes, even fear. Because kindness, wielded with precision like a sword, cuts far deeper than anger ever could. And power, what they once perceived as weakness, was, in fact, a spiritual force field they simply couldn't corrupt. You were untouchable because your heart was shielded by wisdom and unwavering integrity, by an unshakable belief in your own inherent value. You transformed silence into strength and kindness into power. And now, in whispered conversations and furtive glances, they speak of your power with a sense of awe, wondering how someone so seemingly soft could be so utterly unbreakable. You made silence a sword and kindness a kingdom, and that's why your mad heart isn't just admired, it's feared. If this message resonated deep within you, don't just scroll past. Show up for yourself and for others who desperately need to hear this too. And power. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss the kind of real, raw truth that continuously fuels your ascent. Smash that like button if you feel the immense power of a mad heart beating within your own chest. And please, drop a comment below, share your story, your struggles, and power your victories, because your voice truly matters.